You've spelunked into the Matt Cave. Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Matt Cave. Thank you all so much for spelunking on by. This week, the All-Star breaks are over, at least in the NBA and NHL, and we are back into the swing of things. And it's not looking great for pretty much every team in Utah. I'll kind of explain what's going on there. Real Salt Lake, the season has officially kicked off, and they look like they're still on vacation. That game was terrible. So a lot of stuff to kind of break down and go through, but not a lot of it looks terribly great. I'll get that out of the way right now. So thank you all so much for being here. As always, please do rate, review, like, subscribe, comment, wherever it is, however you're listening. Helps me out a ton, gets more spelunkers in here, and gets me closer, ever closer, to being able to do this every day. That is the goal. I want to get in there. I want to get into a network that will allow me to do so, so I need the help from all of my friends, and that's all of you guys. And then hopefully one day I'll be able to afford advertising on my own, and the onus won't be on you. That's where we're at now. So I really do appreciate every single one of you. I say it every week, but I really do. All of you are amazing human beings, and I appreciate you spending time with me every week. I really do. And listening to my madness. Sometimes there is a method to it. Other times I'm just venting. But I appreciate you being here for it all. So you can follow me on Facebook. That is the Matt Cave Podcast. On YouTube, the Matt Cave Podcast, all one word. Twitch.tv/Matt's Cave, MATTS. Again, I'm sorry, I say this every week, but I'm getting closer to being able to stream. My brain is starting to settle in at work. I should be able to do it soon. I know I've said that a lot, so take that with a pound of salt, but it should be there soon. And that's where you can find me on the socials. I know I'm doing myself a disservice by not being on more social media, but I'm terrible at it, and I just don't want to be there. I don't want to get sucked, because I know myself. And if I get on those things, I'll get sucked in and just start scrolling endlessly. And I don't want to do that. I've got other things to do with my time, like paying attention to all of these teams and digesting it and being able to present it to you all in an easy manner. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not on the socials. So who knows? Maybe if I get a big raise at work, I could afford someone to do it for me. But right now, that's not me. But that's enough of that tangent. You're all used to those, though. So here we go. We're going to start off with Real Salt Lake. And that is the first thing that came to my mind when I looked at the final score. 4-0 to the San Jose Earthquakes, who, by the way, finished in dead last season in MLS in points. That's not the way you really want to kick things off. Real Salt Lake, I mean, if you look at the stats minus time of possession, Real Salt Lake did pretty well. But then you look at everything else, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what happened? So, Real Salt Lake dominated time of possession, or not time of possession, because this isn't football, this is football. So they possessed the ball 63% of the time, 2/3 of the game. That's a really good stat. But in soccer, it's different than, say, in basketball or American football. It's not how much time you spend with the ball, it's what you do with it. And San Jose only possessed the ball 36% of the time, but they got 4 goals. They had 9 shots on goal to Real Salt Lake 7. And Real Salt Lake only had 4 saves. That's really bad. That's a bad first showing for Rafael, the big summer signing, I guess you could say, for Real Salt Lake. I mean, they didn't really sign much of anyone. It was mainly people going out and not many coming in. And now that we have an idea of what we need for Real Salt Lake, I hope they start spending something, because that game was terrible. Not a great way to start the season. I have full confidence in Pablo Mastroeni, the manager for Real Salt Lake, because he did it the last 2 years. So he's very capable to do it, and I have full confidence in him to be able to move the pieces around. But what it looks like right now is there's no teeth to the attack for Real Salt Lake. It's a lot like my favorite team, Arsenal, where they don't have any strikers healthy right now. They could pass the ball around all game, but if there's no threat in what they call the final third, which is basically the penalty the penalty box of the opposing team, there's no threat to score in there. Well, like I said earlier, it's not how much possession you have, it's just what you do with it. So if you're just knocking it around in your own half of the field or behind your defensive players and not going forward, then you're going to have major, major problems. So that's kind of where we're sitting for Real Salt Lake right now. It's only one game in. By no means do we need to alert the authorities that this is going to be a terrible season. I did warn you it was going to be tough. And my guy that I said to look out for was subbed on later in the game and really didn't make an impact. So, again, my pick, just like for the hockey club with Connor Ingram, and I'll get to that in a second, but it's not looking great, but it's one game. And Real Salt Lake, there's a whole season ahead. So we'll see what happens. I have full confidence in Pablo Mastroeni and his coaching staff to pull something together to get an attacking threat out there, whether that's signing somebody or it's somehow magically turning a holding midfielder in Pablo Ruiz into an attacker. I mean, stranger things have happened. So, game one, not where you want to be, but the good news is you can only go up from here. That's where we're at with Real Salt Lake. All right, so let's move it all along to the Utah Jazz. And the first game out of the break, fantastic. Clobbered by Oklahoma City Thunder. Looking awesome. Isaiah Collier is actually looking like he should have been a lottery pick. And Keontae George is starting to figure things out, but they still lose. That's what you want to see. What you don't want to see is the Jazz beating a team that is fighting for playoff position, which is what they did against the Houston Rockets, winning 124-115. You don't want to see that. Keontae George went nuts. He scored 30 points. And Lauri Markkanen had a double-double. I mean, Lauri Markkanen is basically a walking double-double. And I just look at that and I go, all right, there's your one win for the rest of the season. For the rest of the season, there's your one win. Will Hardy, if you're starting to win a game, pull your veterans and put the young guys in to get down by double digits, then put some of the veterans back in, you know? But what we've got going right now is pretty much danger time. Because if you look at the Spurs don't have their head coach and talisman, Greg Popovich. Who knows? I mean, who knows? Like, he's recovering from a minor stroke. And as somebody who has had a family member who's had a minor stroke, there's no such thing as a minor stroke. So that really bothers me when they say that. I know medically there's a difference between minor and major, but a stroke is a stroke. It's a big deal. And so they don't know if he will ever be back. I wish the best for him. I hope he is healthy and he gets back to where he wants to be. But I would not expect him back if I were a Spurs fan. And as an outsider looking in on that situation, I think that would be for the best as well. Just because the franchise is undergoing a reset, and they've had almost 30 years of Greg Popovich, and they were very successful. But it's time to kind of move on, I guess. And now their all-world guy, Victor Wembanyama, had a blood clot that was discovered in his shoulder. That's kind of really close to your lungs, and so that's scary. So he's shut down for the rest of the season for very good reason. And so the reason I bring this up is because they are in full-on tear-down tanker mode. I don't see that roster winning very many games. The New Orleans Pelicans, as well, traded away everybody except for CJ McCollum and Zion Williamson. And we all know that Zion Williamson is one trip to Dunkin' Donuts away from being shut down for a game. So they're going to be in ultimate tank mode. The Washington Wizards traded away the one player they had in Kyle Kuzma. And so they're not going to win another game. And Washington has 9 wins on the season. The Pelicans have 13. The Spurs, they're less of a threat. They have 24 wins. But the major competitors here in this teardown, tank mode, are the Raptors, Hornets, Wizards, Pelicans, and now Spurs. The Jazz cannot afford to win games. They cannot. It's the opposite situation of the team that shares the arena with them, the Utah Hockey Club. It's the opposite of that. The Utah Jazz need to lose, and they need to lose often. Their last 10 games have 4 wins and 6 losses. Unacceptable if you're trying to tank to get the top 2 picks. That's unacceptable. So when you look at it, what are they doing? Like, honestly, they've got some nice pieces, but this draft has 2 players that are franchise-altering players. Much like the Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson draft. I still hold that Scoot Henderson is going to figure it out. But Cooper Flagg is generational. And I'm so mad at myself for saying that, but he is that good. So, what are they doing? We get that Coach Hardy is a great coach. He really is. When he gets a roster behind him, he's going to be a coach of the year at some point. We understand what we have in our veterans in John Collins, Lauri Markkanen, Jordan Clarkson. We know who they are. We basically know the kind of player that Keontae George is, and we know that what Bryce Sensabaugh is, and he's an off-the-bench kind of guy. A la Jordan Clarkson, and so is Keontae George, really. Keontae George is in the Jordan Clarkson mold. So what are we doing here? We need to lose games if we want a franchise-altering star. We don't have that. We can't go sign that. And the trade of Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis notwithstanding, you can't really go trade for one of those guys either because their agent or the player themselves will say, I don't want to go play in Utah. So the Jazz have to draft that guy. And that guy's not going to fall to you in the draft. Not anymore. You're not going to get a John Stockton or a Karl Malone. You're not going to get even an Andrei Kirilenko at this point. You're not going to get a Donovan Mitchell. It's not going to fall in your lap. So stop winning. Like, my frustration, you can hear it, is boiling over. We get it, okay? Will Hardy is a great coach. We get it. The veterans can play. John Collins, Lauri Markkanen, Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton, we get it. They can play. We need to lose. And as a fan looking into this, it's like, what am I even rooting for anymore? Because the Jazz keep winning games they're not supposed to win. And it ruins everything. Because everybody knows what Danny Ainge now is too. And they're not going to deal with him the same way that they would deal with a different GM. They're going to look at any trade proposal he puts forward and go, all right, how are we getting bamboozled here? And I put that in G-rated language there. How are we getting bamboozled by Danny Ainge in this trade? So there's not going to be that wow, he pulled that off trade anymore. Like we got for Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, the hauls that we got. That's not going to happen. And there's not going to be a player out there that's going to be like, yeah, trade me to Utah. Not a single guy in the NBA is going to say that. At least a star. So you have to lose. Honestly, what I would love to see is the NBA adopt some sort of end-of-season tournament where you put the worst 6 teams up against each other and play a tournament to get the first overall pick. And then have a monetary bonus involved in that as well. Kind of like the play-in they have for the playoffs. I think they should do that. Because that would eliminate the front offices from tanking the way the Wizards have the past decade. And man, those fans in Washington, holy moly. I mean, you gotta love ball if you're still rooting for the Wizards at this point. Basically, since Michael Jordan signed there when he was in his late 30s, till now, it's been just a S show. Like, really. And I don't want the Jazz to wind up like that. That's kind of where we're headed as an organization, as a not bad enough to tank, but not good enough to make the playoffs. And so they're stuck. which is where, the Nets have been, the Raptors have been, except for that one season with Kawhi Leonard, the Hornets. That's where the Jazz are headed, and I don't want them to be there because I care. I'm a fan. I want to see them do well. It also helps the show out, gives me something more to talk about, so we're going to leave that pinned in there as well. But what are they doing? Stop. Just stop. Stop. Stop winning. This team is not going to go anywhere without a talisman, as I've been calling them, but without that star power, without that guy to come in and just lift everybody up. It's very frustrating to watch because, yeah, sure, it's a neat story. The Jazz in playoff position when they were supposed to be tanking, and then they trade everybody away and it falls apart. This season was supposed to be the season where it just falls apart. And now they're not even the worst team in the NBA. They're in the bottom 5, sure. But, oh man, they need to stop. They just need to stop. All right, the other team that needs to stop is the Utah Hockey Club. They need to stop being so bad defensively. I am not laying this loss at the feet of Connor Ingram because I watched this game, and I would say he only let in maybe one goal he wasn't supposed to. Twice in this game, there were breakaways for the Kings against the Hockey Club. Twice. Connor Ingram stopped one of them. The other one was a goal. So one of the breakaways can be attributed to Michael Kesselring being a young player. He drifted too far into the offensive zone, and the Kings recognized it. They chipped the puck out, and their guy was faster than Kesselring, which is a really tough ask. And he got to the puck first, and he scored. That's not on Connor Ingram, the goalie. That's on Michael Kesselring being young. He wants to get in on the offensive thing. He wants to do the right thing, and it just all kind of happened perfectly to where he got beat by a veteran play. The defense needs to be better, and it can't all just fall on Sergei. Sergachev is playing by far the most minutes, I think, of any defenseman in the NHL. That should come down now that guys are healthy. John Marino, Sean Durzi, these guys are healthy. They're coming back. But they leave their goalies on an island more than I think any team outside of Chicago. And so, with a new fan base, everybody is like, what's wrong with our goalies? And it's not what's wrong with the goalie. Hockey is a team game. It's the defense. The only reliable defenseman we've had all season is Sergachev. And so if he makes a mistake, which is bound to happen over 60 minutes of hockey, then the entire thing breaks down and it looks like the goalie messed up. So I feel for Connor Ingram and I feel for Vejmelka because they let in goals, sure. Every goalie in the NHL is going to let in a howler or two, which is what they call it in soccer. But if the defense just doesn't get in front of the puck and if they don't play along the blue line like they're supposed to and they get sucked into the offensive zone, that's going to put your goalie on an island. So by no means do I think that Connor Ingram and Vejmelka are having bad seasons. They're not great. It's the defense more than anything else. And so guys like John Marino, Ian Cole, Olli Mata, Sergachev, all of them need to up their game. And then, as I said a few weeks ago, the offense needs to show up too. In this game against the Kings, they put 3 goals in against Darcy Kemper, one of the better goalies in the NHL. But all 3 came from the same guy, Barrett Hayton. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's the first hat trick in Utah Hockey Club history. So there's a little bit more for trivia night for you. Who was the first player in Utah Hockey Club history to get a hat trick? Barrett Hayton. But it might have been Dylan Guenther, now that I think about it. I'll have to do some research. But all of them came from the same guy, and Utah had plenty of opportunities to put the puck in net. Chiefly among them, Clayton Keller had a few, and he couldn't get him past Kemper. So there's a lot to work on. The Utah is still close-ish to the playoffs when it comes to the wild card. Obviously, they're not close to Winnipeg. But when you look at it, they are currently 6 points back of Vancouver, who they have a massive game coming up against today as I'm recording this. If they could get that win, that pulls them to within 4 points, which is just 2 wins. And there's a lot of teams now that are going to be sellers that I mentioned last week. So there is going to be veteran help available. They just need to pull the trigger. But it's the same thing as what they say in soccer in the transfer window is you don't want to make a trade just to make a trade. Like, you don't want to do that just to make your fans happy. So what Armstrong's doing, I'm liking. So we'll have to see what happens as we go throughout this season because their home record is terrible. They are tied with the San Jose Sharks for the least wins at home of any team in the NHL. But they've also played the least amount of games at home. So that doesn't really give us a vote of confidence here that they have a lot of home games coming up because, well, let's face it, they can't win at home. We're going to have to see what happens. We'll see what veterans shake loose in the trade market. I'm not terribly hopeful. The Mikko Rantanen situation in Carolina is definitely worth paying attention to because there's more than a couple of rumors out there that Ryan Smith and the Utah Hockey Club are ready to basically give away the farm to have him sign here. And that's what he wants. He wants that top 5 contract, maybe even reset the market for the NHL when it comes to superstars. I would be very pleased with that. We'll have to see because Carolina is the leader in the clubhouse to re-sign him, but he is not happy with how he's been entered into that locker room and how he's being used in their scheme and in their setup. So we'll have to see. This offseason for Utah Hockey Club is going to be very fun because they have the most cap space available of any team that is considered a contender, playoff contender, not Stanley Cup. Let me get that straight. Playoff contention. It's very interesting. Very interesting indeed. I would love to see them swing for the fences, though, this trade deadline. And they can trade for Mikko Rantanen if they want to, but I think they would have to give away way too much to be able to have him come over because Carolina is in the thick of it. They are currently sitting like 3rd, I believe, in the entirety of the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, they would want things to come back that give them immediate help. That being said, Utah does have a couple of very useful pieces on one-year deals. Guys like Ian Cole, guys like Vejmelka even, that could be sent back. So this upcoming trade deadline at the beginning of March is going to be very fun for Utah Hockey Club fans. Whether a trade is made or not, the name of the team is going to be out there for everyone. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be like, okay, well, you know, Tampa is interested in this player, but what is Utah going to do if they want this same player? Like, that's going to be in the conversation, and that's great. So that's where we're at with Utah Hockey Club. They need to stop losing winnable games. They led against the Kings a couple of times. They just need to lock it down defensively is really what needs to happen because the offense is coming along. They just need to lock it down defensively. All right, let's move it on to college basketball. The University of Utah is on a winning streak. They beat both teams from Kansas, as did BYU, which is funny. The news coming out of Kansas is like, we never want to go back to Utah again because Kansas and Kansas State lost to both Utah and BYU on reverse fixtures. It's very funny. So Utah is on a 2-game winning streak. They are in Central Florida today as I'm recording this to face off against the Golden Knights, who are not terribly great. And Utah has a chance to pull up to 500 in the Big 12. That is miles ahead of where I thought they were going to be. And that would be very impressive. So Craig Smith, the head coach, and his staff have done a wonderful job with this roster to have them competitive in the best basketball conference in the country. I'm very impressed with what he's doing in Salt Lake City. Like, very impressed. And as you look at the rest of the season, there are no gimmies left for either school. For the University of Utah, this is like really the last gimme game that they have, because they've got Arizona in Arizona, where BYU just beat them in a very chippy game, and I'll get to that here in a second. Then they come home against Arizona State and West Virginia, who have both been ranked for most of the season. And, Arizona State has not been ranked. I was thinking Arizona. Arizona State's terrible, so that's a gimme game. Arizona State is currently 3-12 in the Big Ten and 12-14 overall. So that might be a gimme game, especially at home. But then they have to face off against West Virginia, who has been ranked for the majority of the season, and then the Holy War down in Provo. So that's where Utah is at. They have an outside chance of potentially being a bubble team for the tournament, for March Madness. They would obviously have to win a game or two in the Big 12 tournament, which is entirely possible considering the teams below them. So, out of nowhere, Coach Smith and the University of Utah couldn't make the NCAA tournament for the first time in years. That's pretty cool, and kudos to them. Let's switch gears now to BYU, who quite possibly has had the best 2-game stretch, I would say 4-game stretch in the history of the school. They went to West Virginia and won a game that nobody thought they were going to win. They then came home and beat a Kansas State team that, well, let's face it, the wheels are falling off for them. And then they welcomed Kansas, ranked at the time, and handed them the worst loss that school, a very blue-blooded school, has ever had as a ranked team against an unranked team. 34 points. Then they go down to Arizona and they beat a ranked Arizona team that was on fire, 96-95. All of a sudden, BYU is a lock for the NCAA tournament. They have entered the locked tier of the projections that Joe Lunardi and Jay Billis and all those guys over at ESPN, who are way more smart than I am about this stuff. So the games left for BYU, obviously end of season Holy War, where the Big 12 got it right in basketball at least, where they're going to end the season with that rivalry game. Not in football, though. That game's going to be in October. Make that make sense. And then you've got at Arizona State, very winnable game. Just like I said with Utah, could be a gimme game. It is on the road for BYU, though, so a little tricky there. At home against a West Virginia team that will have revenge on their mind, but I think BYU will be able to win that game. And then a massive game in Ames, Iowa against number 8 ranked Iowa State. That is going to be humongous. If BYU can win these 3 games, it almost doesn't matter what happens against Utah. And in fact, for the health of the conference, it would be better if BYU lost that game so that Utah could then have a better shot of getting into the big dance. Obviously, that game's weird. We're going to see what happens. But what I've seen from BYU the past 4 games is more free-flowing offense. The ball doesn't freeze on somebody as often. It still does. It can freeze on Igor Demin a lot. It can freeze on Richie Saunders a lot, which is not the offense that Kevin Young wants. He wants a Golden State Warriors-esque, free-flowing, throw the ball around. When the shot clock gets low, you have your guy, which is Richie Saunders. So you get it to him. So that's what I've been seeing. And they are more, I don't know if tough is the right word because they've always been tough, but they push back, I guess is what I'm saying. Because against Arizona, that game was chippy. Elbows, shoulders, knocking people to the floor, diving for loose balls. That's not really BYU's game, and it never really has been. At least for as long as I can remember. And they're doing it. That's impressive to me. And they're only getting better because they're so young. So, moving forward, BYU lives and dies by the 3, just like every Every season, like the past, I don't know, decade, going back to Jimmer, they live and die by the 3. If they're not hitting the 3, they're not winning the game. And it's as simple as that. They have no inside game. Kibikita is really interesting. He's the perfect big man for this system because when he rolls to the hoop off of a pick, good luck stopping him. That's a linebacker coming at you. So I'm very excited for both Utah and BYU as we head down the stretch here because both could make the NCAA tournament. The pressure is really on Utah to be able to do that, but the pressure's still on BYU as well because I believe as we go into this next week, they're going to be ranked. And now the pressure's on them. They'll be the hunted. And it'll be interesting to see how they react. All right, no video game talk today. I ran late, so suffice it to say, coming up this week, we've got Monster Hunter Wilds coming out. I'm very excited about that. I will definitely be playing it, and we'll have a review to you sometime in March. So look forward to that. But thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you all next week when we spelunk back into the Matt Cave.